It's a fascinating new dimension to all of this, the idea that this could pose an intelligence gathering opportunity for the United States. How would U.S. intelligence agencies go about capitalizing on this opportunity?
Well, Putin's effort to restore the Soviet Union in its Cold War model really creates conditions that are ripe for espionage. Our best agents over the years in Russia have been ideologically driven to strike back against what they saw as a corrupt regime. But usually they needed a crisis, something that would precipitate their willingness to cross that line and take the risk. What Putin has done in Ukraine and his repression at home has certainly provided the crisis. The Ukrainians have provided the inspiration, and the United States can offer the tools for people like this to strike back. And many of these best Russian agents we've had were, in fact, volunteers, people who were driven to take action even though they were part of the elite. So I think right now what we see is going to be a situation where people who have opposed Putin maybe in their heart might be more willing to take the bigger risk to step up and do something because they're loyal to Russia, but not to the government. That's
such an interesting dimension of spycraft, right? I think a lot of us think of spies as kind of calculating, cold-blooded mercenaries of a sort. But what you're saying is that this could be a recruitment opportunity because some of the best spies have an emotional investment in overturning a particular regime. Is that right?
They've usually been affected by something personally. There's a confluence of events, usually that affects them or their family. And they might have always considered that things were not as they wanted them to be, but something needs to kind of push them over the edge. I think Putin has given them that crisis. And I believe that Russians who believe in their country and believe in their history will take action at some point, and you don't need many of them, because of what Putin has done to them and their families and their futures.
Douglas, you know, we've talked so much in this conflict about the seemingly stunning miscalculation, if you will, on the part of Russia's military, right? They just are not equipped to fight this ground war in Ukraine. They're running short on supplies, et cetera, et cetera. Their strategy is wrong. But I think the under-discussed part of this is the failure of Putin's intelligence services, right? I mean, he seems sorely outmanned when it comes to Russian intelligence versus American intelligence. American intelligence on all of this, Russian troop movements and Russia's ultimate intention to invade Ukraine, Biden has been spot on. The CIA has been spot on. Do you think the bigger story here is how much Putin has been failed by his own Russian intelligence? What does that tell you about the strength of, you know, Russia's intel services?
Well, I think you reap what you sow. So I don't really believe the Russian intel services have the same sense of speaking truth to power. I think Putin has created this cult of personality around him where those who have bad news to provide are less likely to do so. So I agree that his calculus was based most likely on flawed intelligence, but who's going to tell him that he's not wearing any clothes? So you mentioned the house arrest of General Beseda, who's in charge of his Fifth Service. That's the foreign intelligence group of the FSB. The FSB has really been his source of strength and power. In fact, he gave them responsibility for these near former Soviet states like Ukraine and Belarus. And yet he's the first one we read about who's at a minimum been sacked and perhaps under arrest. We've also seen him arrest, perhaps at least fire, his deputy chief of the National Guard. That National Guard is responsible for protecting the regime. They're the ones who go in the cities, they put down the riots, they put down the protests, and they were dispatched into Ukraine for an occupation. But what they saw was an actual fight and resistance. They were driving around in unarmored vehicles, and they were shellacked. And we quickly saw the deputy removed, but not the chief, which I also think is intriguing.
There's a lot to be gleaned in those choices that Putin is making vis-a-vis his top official. One last question for you, because we mentioned this oligarch in London. Do you think these guys who have some correspondence with Putin, they check in with him quarterly, if you will, they're not in Russia, they are now exiled somewhere else in the world, and they have lost a lot of their fortunes or had their fortunes frozen. Do you think they could make candidates to be recruited for gathering intelligence on behalf of the United States?
I think they would have historical information, but not current intelligence. I'd be more interested in the oligarchs who have left behind, who've lost perhaps billions of dollars, who might be more willing to talk. But more than likely, what we need are officials who are in his inner circle, as bureaucrats, as officials, diplomats, security officials, military officers who feel Putin has done their country wrong. And those are the ones most likely to be available to us, to volunteer, or to be receptive to our approaches. The oligarchs come in different sizes and flavors. There are some who do have influence. Those who have left the country, probably less so.